I hope everybody has had their coffee because this is a very engaging conversation. And I get the pleasure to introduce Quentin Hardy. He's the head of editorial for Google Cloud, which includes G Suite and the Google Cloud Platform. He was a former reporter, so I feel a little sense of connection there, for several decades at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. But Quentin, I am very much hoping that when you leapt out of journalism, they are paying you a whole lot more at Google. Please come on stage.
Come on up, everybody. All right, welcome to the most puzzling topic of this conference when bankers discuss AI and ethics. One chair left.
Yeah.
All right. Now, normally when we talk about ethics and technology, it's very common for people to say, tech is neutral. Tech is a tool. It's really intention. It's what you do with it that matters. This is kind of the, guns don't kill people argument of software. But I think AI actually is a little bit different and bears a little discussion where this is concerned for two reasons. One is the amount and the diversity of the data that's involved in good AI means that there are instantly questions of unforeseen triangulations to derive information people may not know they're revealing. There are questions of transparency and privacy. There are questions of how the data is managed and kept, custody, that matter a lot. So there's one area in data. The other area is that many AI programs increasingly are semi-autonomous. They evolve as they learn, and they change. And they can do this at scale, which means without human intervention, many, many unforeseen things can happen. Or even with some human design ahead of time, things can have a kind of impact at scale that no one really intended to begin with. So yes, when we talk about AI, we're in a new space. And I would like my panelists, why don't we start down at the end, each to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what you do vis-a-vis AI, and what you'd like your customers to know about AI when you go in that they don't usually seem to know.
That's great. Thank you, Quentin. Thanks, Jamie, and everyone for being here. My name's Keith Strier. I'm the Global and America's leader for artificial intelligence at EY in our advisory business. And for those that don't know, EY is one of the big four, of course, and has a robust global advisory business. In fact, in excess of $10 billion a year in revenues. So it's quite a successful, expansive business. Over 60,000 practitioners in, 150 countries. It's pretty much everywhere. And we advise across the entire spectrum of technology and business transformation and risk and every really facet of the value chain that you can think of, both in the public and the private sector. And like you said, people, look, I think CRM is pretty cool, but we won't be having any panels about the ethical implications of CRM anytime soon. And I'm pleased that EY and many of my peers in the consulting industry have a nice, robust business around ERP. That's a really important part of the value chain as well. But again, we're not, you don't see prime ministers standing up at the UN and talking about the importance of ERP to the future of the economy. This is a fundamentally different thing we're talking about. And not to get too overly academic, but just to have the big picture, right? I mean, since the dawn of humanity, when we figured out how to domesticate like plants and animals, little things like that, 11,000 years ago, there's only been 23 innovations that qualify as a general purpose technology. Little things like the steam engine, and, the internet, and things like that, electricity. AI is the 24th. It's just that simple, right? And to be a general purpose technology, it has to be something that has broad implications for society, almost limitless potential in terms of use cases and so forth. And again, there aren't that many things in the last 11,000 years that meet that qualification. So when I sit down with clients, and again, both on the public sector side, heads of state as well as senior executives, make it very clear to them that this is not, there's hype and there's lots and lots of confusion, like Tower of Babel level confusion as to what is AI and how it's applied. We can work through that. But but have no question, have no concern as to whether this should be a priority for you. Right? This needs to be on your agenda. This needs to be a critical part. It doesn't have to be the only thing you talk about. It doesn't even have to be the #1 thing you talk about, but this needs to be part of your vision for the future of your country, for the future of your business, for the future of your customer experiences. There's just not a part of the world that won't be impacted to some degree. And so let's take this very seriously. And then, of course, let's understand what it means for you and what your priorities are going to be, because there isn't a simple roadmap or template for everybody, and you've got to figure that out. And so that's where we are today.
Amir?
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, thank you again to everybody that's organized this wonderful summit. It's really amazing. It's my second time, and I'm enjoying it thoroughly. So thank you, Jamie, and your team. My name's Amir Hussain, and I'm founder and CEO of SparkCognition, which is an AI company based in Austin, Texas. We build AI platforms, technologies that are applied to industrial AI scenarios, so energy customers, manufacturing customers, and also in aerospace and logistics. One of our largest partners is Boeing, with whom we've recently done a joint venture, a company called SkyGrid, which will look to expand the ability for aviation to go from dealing with the thousands of aircraft that transit the skies now to millions of autonomous aircraft flying through the sky. We're working on autonomous power plants with some of the largest manufacturers of turbines in the world by embedding artificial intelligence technology. And then also, quite significantly, we pioneered the concept of hyperwar. One of our board members is a 4-star Marine General, General John Allen. Working with him over the last 3.5 years, we developed the doctrine of hyperwar, which has now been adopted in not only many institutions within the US armed services, but also internationally with allies. And then finally, I've written a book on artificial intelligence called The Sentient Machine, and a new one called Hyperwar, which has just recently come out. And I serve on the Council on Foreign Relations AI Task Force, as well as the CNAS AI Task Force in DC.
What do you want your customers to understand about AI, particularly as it pertains to ethical issues?
Well, I think so if you take one class of our customers, which is DoD, right? One of the things that DoD is currently struggling with is that any mention of artificial intelligence being used in DoD is automatically interpreted as killer robots. I've given talks where there have been protests outside. Stop the robots, stop the killer robots, and so on. And I respect those sentiments. There are genuine fears around the use of this technology. But the reality is that we are far away from artificial general intelligence. I would like not only my customers, but also the wider world to understand this. The problems that we face now are not any imagined malevolence of AI, but really from the malevolence of man. That's really where all problems stem from. And in fact, after 14 billion years of evolution, the only container that has given rise to malevolence is the human brain. So I think we need to worry about that first. That's one thing to keep in mind. The other element, of course, is that AI has many very beneficial aspects, even in DoD applications. Everything from efficiency to saving people's lives to actually making kinetic strikes less deadly by improving the accuracy and reducing the amount of firepower that needs to be applied. So there's a lot of complexity when you lift the lid, and it's not as simple as DoD plus AI equals killer robots and let's all go nuts.
I think you're surfacing an interesting problem, which is as you move into new spaces, what you call a general use technology, there's frequently a kind of crisis in language. People don't know how to talk about this stuff very well. And we're seeing this in warfare quite a bit, where assassination and targeted killing are somehow much worse than dropping a cluster bomb on a whole village. And the morality of that is kind of peculiar, and in some ways reflects the way we can now see and count everyone who is killed in war. Can you imagine if there had been an iPhone on Normandy Beach? The way in which we think about this is changing very quickly. But as you say, the ethics and the rules are not very well established yet. Priya?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's amazing to be here. This is my first time here. And I'm excited, especially being in this panel, which talks about the societal implications, not just talking about what are the great things AI can do. So Priya Vijayarajendran, I'm the CTO, Vice President for Applied AI. What does it mean is, a tagline is, I make AI work for enterprises. So there are two parts of my job. One is to find practical, real-world problems which enterprises faces and make it work. We don't have to invent new things that are already available, commoditized AI, and to build end-to-end business solutions is part of it. The second part of the job is, we get to see the black box behind the AI in terms of where do you deploy it, what data do you use, how do you train it, all those boring stuff, as we call it, making sure those things are wired right to get the business value. So that's my role. And the second part of our intro is, in my point of view, before we reap the benefits of AI, we started to democratize data quite a bit, right? And we have not even dealt the consequence of what democratization of data means. I can access this data. I can access many of your data, or enterprises can actually have all of your data. I mean, GDPR has shaken up quite a bit for all enterprises. So before we could process this information, we are already building applications using machine learning and AI. I grew up in enterprise software. I used to work for SAP for 18 years. I built software for enterprises all along. Now, with this newfound data as an asset and data everything, we are taking advantage of complex techniques like machine learning and AI. So before we could understand how we can be responsible about the usage of data. So what I would love for my customers to understand is what role data is playing and what is the value that you're getting. Because oftentimes we see value of AI to be, can I have a conversion rate? Can I do this? So it's measured in terms of value. There are some ethical and human level expectations that we also have to understand. So those will be the ones that I would love to share.
Josh?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joshua Lachter. I'm on the leadership team at ASAPP in New York City. We build AI native products for large organizations. And by AI native, we mean products designed, conceived of, engineered, maintained, deployed, improved with machine learning's rather unique capabilities and inputs in mind. And for us, the prospects of AI can only sort of be realized with a kind of end-to-end approach. We believe that trying to kind of layer AI into existing operations without having a proper set of rails, as you might think about it, is probably destined to failure. And we take the approach primarily at very large organizations at building products designed to tackle very large business problems. In general, AI tackles problems that for us contain three attributes. Huge amount of inefficiency, you might call it systemic brokenness, massive amount of cost, and a huge amount of data. When data, cost, and inefficiency combine, AI is uniquely good at solving those problems where previous solutions didn't. For us, the way those problems get solved is not simply to sort of deploy AI, but to deploy an end-to-end system that automates a given set of tasks, and what it doesn't automate augments to drive further automation. And for all this sort of buzz and sometimes hysteria around AI and its implications, for us, AI can really be distilled down to those two mechanisms, automation and augmentation. I think something that we hear a lot from our clients is sort of the confusion around timeline, around AI and its ability, and indeed how they as an organization can define AI's path in their organization and some of the ethical implications. I think that more than being a sort of mechanism of fear at organizations, we think that AI can expose not only underlying processes at organizations, but optimize them. And I think that some of the fears that have been raised about biases and things like that, I'm sure we'll touch on here, can in large part be mitigated by the proper deployment of artificial intelligence.
Actually, let's touch on that right away, because there's a great example of AI and bias. A couple years ago, fine firm decided to apply AI to hiring engineers. And very quickly, the machine went through years of hiring and looked at all the resumes and how they hired and what the outcome was, and immediately concluded that attending a women's college was a sell signal. That if you had attended a women's college, you should probably discard the resume. And this shocked the people who were trying to develop this program. And what had happened was they had examined what engineering managers had done, and they had had an unconscious bias against hiring women. If you go to a women's college, there's a strong likelihood you're a woman. So kick that one out. And it surfaced, and this was in the press and in the popular view, and people were like, oh, the horrible AI is, look what it's doing. In fact, it's a mirror to the social practices. And when that surfaced and it goes crazy, that's great, but I'm not sure we should blame the machine necessarily.
Yeah, that's right.
Which leads us into a larger discussion about data awareness, and data quality in some ways. And you talk about a platform, and let me make this jump ball, but no, Priya, take this first. Who do you think, what sectors of the economy are going to be advantaged most by AI? Who has good data quality, who has well understood systems that will see efficiencies right away? And how will that sort of change the overall shape of the economy?
I think I can say that nobody has good data, quality data to begin with.
Yeah. There's some exceptions.
In real world enterprises, I'm talking about, that's the market that I deal with. So there is obviously a lot of data quality, governance, and harmonization to begin with. But I would agree with Joshua that things which is too complex, large volumes of things to be processed, AI can actually significantly help. But coming back to the specific industry, for example, education is something which is phenomenal because, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not everywhere. So AI can actually democratize us very effectively. So I'm a big fan in the edtech space quite a bit. And it's also working, I won't say it's working in favor, but it can be consciously made to work in favor in terms of digital targeting, actually. Today, which would be mitigating the bias. There's a famous marketing thing called Ad Fisher. You all might have read about it. Basically, it just gave some high-profile jobs to male candidates and not so high-profile jobs to female candidate. The Cambridge scientists have actually debunked it and published the paper to everybody else that why it has been doing it. So if we consciously reverse such things of not doing it, then we can correct the human biases which already exist in the systems. So digital targeting generally, not just in terms of products, but in terms of promoting jobs and democratizing opportunities across, those are fabulous because these are happening at scale. The other thing is in the healthcare, phenomenal. As much, there is a lot of invasion of privacy of data, but imagine that I have a specific gene mutation which needs to be correlated with somebody in different part of the world. Without AI, how are we ever going to do it? There are ways in which we can do it without losing my data privacy issues. So AI is phenomenal, going to be of massive asset to all of us. So these three industries I could think pretty much.
I think there's another way of thinking about it as well, which is that a well-understood and a well-bounded system can have sensors put in it, and the data can be brought up to speed fairly quickly and efficiency is found. In our case, we did it with heating and cooling in our data centers.
Yeah.
Very simple problem, relatively, complex engineering. But the AI was imposed on that and pretty quickly got to 15% efficiency gain and then trained itself to 30% efficiency gain. Does, Amir and Keith, let me ask you, does manufacturing, do utilities, is that something that gets replicated across those industries? And Keith, you travel a lot internationally. Are there countries that are in a better place relative to others?
So I would answer, so to the investors in the audience, I would answer the question this way. I think this is kind of a very investor-heavy conference, right? So I would answer it this way. I think to your earlier point that there are industries that on paper look ripe for using AI and applying a certain way, right? Healthcare being a great example. Just awash in data, compelling business case, and the value proposition is dramatic. But then there's that second question you have to ask, which is not whether the business case or the value is there, but are they ready? What's the readiness level? And I would say the readiness, you'd answer that in there's two ways. First, do they even recognize, is their leadership sort of ready to step up and drive the change necessary to make that business case happen? Because this is not really about just technology, right? There's the big human organizational aspect. And then the second level of readiness is literally, do they have good data and all those other questions? And when you run it through that filter, you get different kinds of answers. So for example, again, healthcare is, the business case is compelling, but there are some healthcare leaders that get this, but the readiness level is very low.
Have you been in a doctor's office lately? There's still a wall of pencil and paper files.
It's pretty bad. Yeah, it's alarming. But the readiness level is low, right? Now, in contrast, you take financial services, where globally high level of awareness and investment in technology, high level of leadership focus on the opportunity, and from a readiness perspective, a lot of years of investing in digital experiences and digital infrastructure and data governance. And so as a sector, actually pretty high level of readiness, frankly. And so you do see financial services moving a lot faster in the adoption of some of those technologies. From an international perspective, what's very interesting, I am working with a number of governments around the world, and I would say the business case is pretty compelling there as well. I mean, the opportunity to expand services and improve the citizen experience and address some of these profound ethical and legal issues are there. So that's theoretically looks good. Not every country is ready, but in the last 2 years, we went from having, there wasn't a country on earth with a national AI strategy, and today there's about 35, so it's become pretty profound very quickly. But in terms of readiness, that last layer, some countries are excited but not ready. Other countries, I work with Estonia very closely with the national CIO of Estonia on their AI program, and that is a small country in the doorstep of Russia that happens to be the most digital government on earth. First country to put all their data in the cloud and digital elections and all these kinds of things. So when they weren't the first to have an AI strategy. We only kicked off their AI program last summer, but Canada was 2 years ago. But their level of readiness is tremendous. So when they were ready to go, they're going to be able to push that out and execute that vision very quickly. And so so there's these different filters, and I would apply the same filters to businesses and from an investment perspective. It might look good on paper, but is that sector ready? And I think that's from a timing perspective, that's important.
Amir, could you recapitulate a little bit of our conversation about China earlier?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. So I think, two things. One, on the industrial side, we have repeatedly over and over shown that in systems that are kind of well understood, where you've got sensors, whether it's large industrial pumps, turbines, so on and so forth, AI can come in and provide returns that are simply impossible with human practitioners. If a human practitioner is able to project a pump failure 4 hours in advance of it occurring, AI can step in and extend that to 5 days. We've done that with some of our key customers. On the other hand, if you think about internationally where the opportunities are, I've spent quite a bit of time in China just in the last 90 days. What I'm impressed with most there is speed. There's sort of this general narrative around how China has a larger population and therefore they have a lot of data. That's all true. But a country of 320-odd million people can also generate a lot of data. Maybe not the same kind of data, because we don't want cameras everywhere. But there are still, within our government, lots of other sources of data that have not yet been opened up and are not yet available. So I think there are massive opportunities. China is moving very, very fast. They are really excelling at the engineering of AI and taking all of the assets that they have and actually building real, functional, valuable systems that are valuable to them in their societal context. So clearly that transformation is happening. The last point, I think, on the national plan, yes, there are 35 countries or so. Unfortunately, we are not one of them. The executive order that came out most recently did not have a cent of funding referenced in it. The changes around rapid acquisition that have been discussed back and forth for the last several years. There have been numerous changes. You create an organization, you run it, you demote it 2 levels down in the pecking order. It becomes irrelevant. People don't want to stay there. They move on. Everything they were doing gets canned. This is not a made-up story. It's unfortunately a very sad and real tale. So I think we've got to get our act together. There are opportunities to leverage all of this. There are examples to learn from other countries. We are the country that invented artificial intelligence. And to see us fritter away our lead, and we today do have a lead, to see us fritter away this lead in such a heartless fashion is, frankly, to me, incomprehensible.
Do you think we'll have to give up privacy to retain the lead?
I don't think that that's necessarily the case, although I will tell you that the definition of privacy will change. Look, in general, will more be known about you now than was known about you 40 years ago? Of course, and that trend will continue. It's very interesting. President Putin, about 2013, decided that in the Kremlin, he wanted to move from computers to physical typewriters because he thought that that was an unhackable system. I'm writing a new book, and in the opening chapter, I talk about a hack attack on mechanical typewriters. See, the thing is that every key in a mechanical typewriter produces an audio signature. You can put that through a machine learning system. You can identify individual keys. It turns out that you don't need to know the language that's being typed on the typewriter because all languages have a statistical model. So E, for example, will be used most often. You don't even need to know that that sound was for E. Ultimately, you can deconstruct the language and you can reverse engineer Russian just with those acoustic signatures. But then the next...
And it's never encrypted.
And it's not encrypted. So the next criticism is, but then you have to be in the room. Who's going to be in the room with Putin? And the reality is, you don't have to be charming. You don't have to be in the room with Putin. You can bounce a laser beam off of a flying drone from 3 miles away, off of a window, get the reflection of that laser beam as it hits a receiver on the drone, and you can recreate the acoustic signature that was created inside the room. This is a purely mechanical system, and with all the sophistication that we've created now in the world around these mechanical systems, each one of us is an emitter. We emit data, we emit position, we emit... Whether or not we carry stuff on us, there is constant emission. And we've got to understand this. In fact, like I mentioned, the whole point of this new book is to say, this is how exposed we are. So, does privacy have to be redefined? Absolutely. But I think the way to counter some of the kind of control that corporations, governments, and others want to exercise on us can only be done with artificial intelligence. I would hate for an AI to do an automated ocean analysis, figure out how neurotic somebody is, and then create natural language generation messages targeting that individual up to the point of making them go crazy. This is very possible. It seems humorous, but it's quite possible, and it's possible to do this at scale. And some elements of this have been done by organizations in the course of previous elections. Automated ocean analysis is a real thing.
Jamie, open the bar. Early. I'm a little freaked out. No, I mean, I can't push back on any of it. And that is a snapshot of the world where now there are going to be data-rich and data-poor industries, and they will pull ahead. There will be data-rich and data-poor countries, data-quality countries. And then there is a new sense of governance. Shoshana Zuboff, an economist at Harvard, has written a book called Surveillance Capitalism about companies like Google or Facebook and the way in which they observe people and place ads. But I was thinking about this in the context of China, where they're trying to develop a facial database of the whole country so they can pick people out of crowds should they want. And if they're doing that, they're probably building a parallel database of 20 or 30 million interesting people elsewhere in the world they'd like to have the faces of. And if they're doing that, the NSA is probably doing it because it's always an arms race in tech. And so that's surveillance authoritarianism in China. In Europe, they use smartphones and identifiers to deliver services. So that's surveillance social democracy. My point is, surveillance may be the prefix to any political system now. Yeah. If you had anarchy, you'd have surveillance anarchy, yeah. Right?
Well, the European Union, for what it's worth, because you mentioned artificial empathy, the European Union just turned on, around the whole border of the EU now, facial recognition combined with artificial emotional intelligence to read emotion, to now basically automate the identification, not just of whether it's you, but whether you're lying.
Okay.
So that's in force right now.
Okay, so any social organization and possibly many corporate organizations will have surveillance within their activation, within the way they move through the world. I would like to have a thought experiment. I'd start with you, Josh. What is privacy ideally in 5 or 10 years?
I think we, to an extent, already have some exposure to what this kind of surveillance looks like and feels like, and it's on the internet every day. That most of the advertisements served to us when you open your phone are in some way AI enabled. 5 years ago, or 8 years ago, they weren't, and I was getting a lot of diaper ads, which wasn't so appropriate for a 20-something, right? Or maybe it knew something that I didn't, which is even scarier.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's changed, and the online ads in the intervening period, because of surveillance and because of the improvements in the underlying algorithms, have improved. And I can say, honestly, in the past sort of few years, I've probably bought 1 to 2 items based on online ads, but they're still not very good, right? And honestly, over the last few years, I've probably only clicked on an ad half a dozen times at most. And so I think some of the fears of surveillance are not manifesting. Even when you have my full browsing history, which is a pretty good proxy for what I think about and what I care about, don't always manifest in nefarious or even particularly effective ways. And so I think that there'll be instances where we trade off a degree of surveillance for optimal outcomes. I think health is a probably really good example of that. I'll gladly, as most people in this room probably would too, would trade a degree of surveillance on my daily activities and what's going on in my body for early indications of disease.
Okay, so surveillance with transparency and some agency about what's being surveilled.
Correct. I think that's the key formula.
So not just on the surveillance part, there is this concept of us merging with the machines happening. We've evolved quite a bit, right? So today, and I loved Amir talking earlier about how software has eaten many of the things that we used to do. I'm okay with the fact that I'm asking, my phone, which has my passwords. I practically don't carry my wallet. I can pay everywhere. I can search information. I'm reading everything about the summit using the phone, etc. So I'm okay with the concept of merging with the machine. So it's going to evolve more rapidly in future. There's been generations, the way how my mom used to transact with the bank, it's not the same way I do, and it's not the same way my kids are doing. So it's evolving. So privacy gets to evolve with this, very much so what Joshua just explained about how much digital I am okay with revealing about me as a digital entity. That will evolve quite a bit. Definitely, that's privacy, but that's why we have this concept of explainability and responsibility. So I'm okay with the fact that, for example, I know the fact that I'm going to be possibly talking to a digital assistant more than possibly to my family members or my cousins. That's going to possibly happen, but I will not be okay. So if I ask them, please pay my bills, but I don't want the digital assistants to come back and say, Priya, I have a new credit card offer for you. So those are the subtle differences of, I want the privacy to be in the best interest of mine. I think if AI could become my best interest, which should be my human right or civil right, then I'm okay with that privacy. Okay. So that's going to be the evolution.
Agency. Yeah. Amir, what is an ideal form of privacy in 5 years?
Well, I don't know about an ideal form. I'll tell you what I expect to happen. I think, most people that are being targeted by anyone, whether a large corporation or a large government, people of interest, no major decision that they make in their life will be done in a way that that entity that's watching them cannot predict that that decision is about to happen. So if you define privacy in those terms, I mean, there's smaller elements to privacy, but the real big thrust is any major decision you make in your life, you usually think about it for some period of time, and then you act. Anything like that will be known to anybody that wants to spend the money and the time to find that out. But that in and of itself may not be all that bad. What's worse is the ability to then use that knowledge to shape the outcome of that decision and to change the outcome of that decision. That, I believe, is a very real risk, and that's something that technology for which has already been developed today. Whether that will start to play in volume in 5 years, I don't know. But when you see deep fakes and you see fake writing and you see prompt-based writing and you see automated analysis of psychographic profiles, and you can automatically detect not only the psychotic nature of an individual, but their particular triggers, and you combine all of these things together, you are in a world where you can automate psychological attacks at scale. And of course, I use the more drastic phrase psychological attack at scale, but an advertiser would say, well, this is what we always do. We've always been trying to get people to buy our stuff. We just didn't know enough about them. But there are also more drastic decisions that you can force people to take. And I feel that I don't see a path where in 5 to 10 years, any major decision that a person of interest is about to make can remain hidden.
So I'll just add and take a completely different perspective, which is sort of just through a customer lens. I'll just end on this note. So we've all been customers of something in the last whatever decades, and I remember the early days of Amazon and e-commerce. The whole debate was, will people trust doing transactions in the internet? Will you put your credit card, you actually hand your credit card over to some company, on the internet? And it took time for people to buy in and trust that, right? But we all, for the most part, had an expectation as a customer that our data would be safe and all that kind of stuff. And frankly, I feel like that expectation has been pretty much beaten to death, right? I mean, I've lost track of how many emails I've received from various vendors saying your data's been hacked and that kind of thing. But that's our perspective, and we're a bunch of oldish type folks here on this panel. I have 3 teenagers at home. They're all Gen Zs, right? They're all born post-2000. And these are the customers of the future. These are the buyers of the future. These are the employees of the future. And I can say conclusively that my 3 children have zero interest in privacy. It doesn't even factor into their brain. The things that they post online, the things that they share with their friends, the way in which they do it, it doesn't even occur to them. And I'm not saying it's always a good thing, but nonetheless, they do not anchor to the same expectations that I had, or I think we had, kind of coming into this sort of digital world in the last 20 years. They are just born to a world where you just share and you post and whatever, and whether it's within your bubble of friends or it's in a broader, Twitter type environment, they just don't have that expectation. So
it is interesting.
That will shape, I think, the markets.
The public life of sexual identity, being trans, being both, having your pronouns changed, has arisen right as people are more observed than ever. It's an interesting parallel. I have a couple of minutes for questions, if you want to prepare those, and then we'll call it. I also want to give a shout that, is it the 14th and 15th of November?
Austin.
In Austin.
Yes.
We're going to
Time Machine Conference.
We're going to carry on a 2-day AI conference on this very topic. We'll keep going. Very quickly, we've at Google have prepared our AI principles, and they quickly are, be socially beneficial, avoid creating a reinforcing bias, built and tested for safety, accountable for people, incorporate privacy design principles, notice and consent, uphold standards of scientific excellence, and be made available for uses that are accorded to these principles. Explainability is probably in there as well. Is there anything you might add or push back on in terms of what a good AI principle should be for a company?
Well, the problem is, the proof of the pudding lies in its eating. There was another, and I won't name it, but there was another nonprofit AI initiative that recently came upon, a natural language text generator that they felt was too dangerous to share with the public. The mandate of that organization required the organization to share all of their work and make it open. So that particular pudding wasn't very palatable, and so the rules suddenly were relaxed or changed or whatever you want to call them. I think at the end of the day, people will say some things and then they will do other things. And this is not just because the people involved are questionable. It's also because AI is a new science, and what it produces will sometimes surprise people quite significantly. That particular innovation, by the way, by experts, when they were polled a couple of years ago, the experts thought that you won't be able to write passages like that for another 6 to 7 years. So I'm sure they weren't thinking that they would have to tackle this problem, but they did 6 years in advance, and they decided that they wouldn't follow their original ideology and their original goals. So I don't see anything wrong with the rules that you've stated. These are all commendable. They're well thought out. But I think the types of situations we will see will give us pause. And as they say in war, the enemy also gets a vote. And here, reality gets a vote.
I don't want reality to have a vote.
But the very fact that Google has principles, right, and as do a number of the other big tech companies, and have formed AI ethics committees.
And increasingly, they're enforced by the working population.
That's right, and the employees themselves, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that there are sort of AI ethics committees, that's still very, very unusual. I mean, in terms of the broader economy, and you're probably talking about the sort of the real world companies you work with, the very, very few of my clients have an AI ethics committee, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. Even though they're aggressively investing in AI. And so just as far as a practical matter, that's still the domain of a very few number of companies that have taken it that seriously.
There was this, sorry, go ahead.
I think that's something we can continue to expect, that despite trying to develop these committees and these systems, we're still going to be reactionary to a large degree, and I think you can continue to see that. A lot of universities, to give an example, we work a lot in the NLP space, and when I was in school, there was no sort of check against a systematic check against plagiarism. You sort of knew it when you saw it, right? And now, at I think many major universities, a lot of professors are running papers through these algorithms that can detect plagiarism with astonishing accuracy. What happens when there are programs that can write papers almost as good as humans can? What check do we have against those? And so I think in lots of kinds of organizations and institutions, we'll have to see these committees evolving to things that they didn't conceive of yet, that sort of these capabilities will allow for.
In 1935 or so, the poet T.S. Eliot wrote this line: "They dream of systems so perfect they won't have to be good."
Sure. Yeah.
And we still have to be good. And I'm good enough to take one or two questions. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Ben Schachter from Macquarie. I'm just wondering if the panelists have a general agreement on what AI is, the definition, and if that matters. And then related to that, has AI evolved from previous things, or is it more revolutionary that all of a sudden this data is just more valuable?
All right, well, I'll just take a quick answer, because I think it does matter that you have some agreement within your organizations, you're speaking a common language. I don't think it matters that you have universal consensus on one main descriptor, but I think it's important to know what it's not. And I think that when you think that AI is the same thing as IT, then you end up assigning the wrong processes and protocols and understandings to it, and so you end up implementing it or when you should be applying it. And there's a lot of ways to approach it which could be wrong. But in terms of a right answer, frankly, I have a slide in one of my standard narratives where I provide 5 definitions of AI to try to explain the different ways of thinking about it. And I don't really over-index, even within my global organization, on having one definition. But I think there's probably more wrong definitions than there are right ones.
I'd say it's pattern finding and exploitation of patterns at scale, but you can get really granular pretty quick.
But you want to put a business lens on it, potentially.
The one that has sort of withstood the test of time since the 50s, since Dartmouth, has been that AI is a branch of computer science, and it's tasked with building smart programs that do work that, in the absence of these programs, would require human intellect. So the definition basically was a human-centric definition, which is anything that a computer cannot do but a human can do. When you build a smart program to solve that problem, the solution comes within the bounds of artificial intelligence. The problem with this definition has been that as we've conquered chess, and as we've conquered Go, and as we've deconstructed human thought, that we felt for 2,000 years represented the epitome of human brilliance, and now suddenly a program can solve it. Suddenly, there were a lot of people that came out of the woodwork and said, well, that wasn't artificial intelligence, that was just calculation. And AI has had this problem through its history. Whenever a hard problem is solved, people turn around, look at the deconstructed algorithm and say, how can this be intelligence? But that to me is secondary. The point is, what's the next challenge for us to go and solve? And we sort of live, anybody that works seriously in AI lives under the assumption that when we solve that next thing, there'll be a similar criticism, and people will tell us that this algorithm, really, you could have run this on, it's just purely computation, and there's nothing particularly exciting. But you know what? We get another capability, and another capability, and another capability, and that's how progress works.
Anything you'd like to add?
I mean, partially agree with some of the definitions, but pretty much AI is, if this was done by a human, we would have called that person to be smart. But because there is always a cognition overload or limitation to ourselves, if it's been done by a machine, we are calling it as an artificial intelligence. Simple example is, if you give me 500 page of document and you're expecting me that I know every answer out of this, I would be considered as a super smart human. But if I teach the ways of how to study that 500-page document to a system and the system replicates it, that becomes AI. It's a general purpose definitions, both we can take from academic references, and if you were to apply in practical real enterprise problems, this would be pretty much consistent. We are trying to introduce the human decision-making systems by feeding data sets which are patterns where the systems or programs learns from it. That's kind of been the underpinnings of how we use AI.
For us, as I said earlier, we often try and remove a lot of the buzz and sometimes the hysteria around AI by saying, look, the automation of a given set of tasks and the augmentation of humans in those tasks to drive further automation. And it's that kind of feedback loop that's often missing. Our feeling and frankly, a concern we have about the development of AI at large organizations is that there's been a kind of bias towards building it in-house without expertise to do that. And when building it in-house, cobbling together a lot of seemingly intelligent systems that don't really work together well, and the outcomes, aside from any of the larger ethical implications, often don't work very well. So I think seeing sort of AI as a kind of feedback loop between automation and human augmentation is the framework that we use.
So Quentin, you ask 4 people, you get 4 answers.
There you go.
That's what it is.
I had one too.
Yeah.
One more question. Quick question. I think we're on to our next thing. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.